Footsteps echoed heavily through the damp basement of the Marsh family's estate. "Don't wake her," Theo hissed, blocking the heavy steel door. Julian shoved past his top enforcer, expecting a terrified hostage. Instead, the ruthless crime boss froze. The heavy-set woman asleep on the cot was clutching his murdered brother's missing child. Rain lashed against the frosted basement windows of the Marsh family's compound in South Boston. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest that had been raging inside Julian Marsh for the past 3 months. Ever since the ambush on Hanover Street that had claimed the lives of his older brother Michael and his sister-in-law Elena, Julian had been a man possessed. He had torn the city's underbelly apart, leaving a trail of broken syndicates and shattered alliances in his wake. But the bloodshed had brought him no peace, because the most crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. Henry, Michael's 3-month-old infant son, had vanished from the wreckage of the bullet-riddled SUV that night, swallowed by the shadows of the city. Julian had assumed the worst. In his world, a missing heir was a dead heir. Until tonight, his top enforcer, Theo, had received a tip about a woman hiding out in a condemned apartment building in Dorchester. The informant claimed she had been buying expensive baby formula with cash, but had no hospital records of giving birth. Theo had acted quickly, kicking in the door and dragging the woman and the infant to the estate's interrogation cellar. Julian stood outside the heavy steel door, his tailored suit dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor. His jaw was clenched so tight, his teeth ached. He was ready to torture whoever was inside. He was ready to tear the truth from their throat with his bare hands. He reached for the iron handle, but Theo stepped in front of him, raising a cautious hand. "Don't wake her," Theo warned, his voice an uncharacteristic, urgent whisper. Julian's dark, hollow eyes snapped to his enforcer. "Excuse me, boss, just look first," Theo said, stepping aside and slowly easing the heavy door open. "She fought like a wild animal when we grabbed her. Took 3 of us to get her in the car, but the kid, she wouldn't let go of the kid, and she hasn't hurt him." Julian shoved the heavy door the rest of the way open, the hinges groaning in the damp air. The interrogation room was bleak, illuminated only by a single swinging bulb that cast harsh shadows against the concrete walls. There, in the center of the room, lay a rusted iron cot. Julian froze. The breath completely abandoned his lungs. Hurled on the thin mattress was a woman. She was heavyset, there was no other word for it. And she carried her weight with a profound, undeniable presence. She had broad shoulders, thick, sturdy thighs, and a large, soft belly that pressed against the fabric of her faded, oversized sweater. Her face was round, framed by a messy tangle of damp, dark curls, with a heavy bruise blooming along her left cheekbone, where she had likely struggled against Theo's men. But it wasn't her size, or her battered appearance, that rooted Julian to the spot. It was what she was holding, tucked securely against her chest, shielded entirely by her thick arms and the generous curve of her body, was a baby. Her physical bulk was acting as a literal fortress for the child. She was breathing in deep, rhythmic, heavy breaths, her chest rising and falling, creating a warm, plush cradle. Julian took a slow, agonizing step forward, the soles of his shoes silent against the stone. He approached the cot as if he were approaching a bomb. The baby was sleeping soundly, its tiny face pressed into the soft folds of the woman's chest. The child was wrapped in a faded blue blanket, but one tiny chubby hand had slipped free. Tangled in the baby's tiny fingers was a tarnished silver chain. At the end of the chain hung a heavy St. Jude medallion. Julian's vision blurred. The edges of the room spun. It was Michael's medal, the one Elena had pinned to Henry's car seat the day he was born. It was Henry, his nephew, the rightful heir to the Marsh syndicate. He was alive. Julian fell to his knees beside the cot. The legendary, ruthless boss of the Marsh family, a man who had ordered the executions of rival captains without a flinch, was suddenly trembling violently. He reached out a scarred, tattooed hand, his fingers hovering millimeters from the baby's soft cheek. He wanted to snatch the boy up. He wanted to roar in triumph and weep in grief. But as his fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, the woman on the cot shifted. Her thick arm tightened instinctively around the baby, pulling Henry deeper into the protective softness of her torso. Even in her exhausted, battered sleep, her maternal protective instinct was absolute. Her large frame completely engulfed the child, making it impossible to take him without waking her. Julian withdrew his hand, looking at the woman carefully. Who was she? She was different from the people he usually met. She wore simple sneakers, comfortable jeans, and a cozy gray cardigan. Her hands showed she did real work. She looked like an everyday person. Yet she had kept the little one safe in Boston for 90 days. Theo, Julian said softly. Yes, sir. Please bring the doctor here now and bring soft blankets. Theo paused. She's a person we're investigating, Julian. We don't know. She's not harmful, Julian said calmly. He noticed how the woman's body was positioned to protect the little one's head. See how she's holding him. She's keeping him safe. The woman's breathing changed. Her face showed she was waking up. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked around, confused for a moment. Then she saw Julian beside her. Her eyes showed fear immediately. She moved quickly backward on the bed. She pressed against the wall, holding the little one close. She wrapped her arms around him protectively. Please, she said with urgency. Don't come near him! Stay back! Julian raised his hands peacefully, staying where he was. It's okay. I won't harm you or the child. I don't believe you, she said, looking at him carefully. Her eyes scanned the room quickly. She was thinking about her options. Instead of giving up, she became more determined. She positioned herself between Julian and the child. You're Julian Marsh, she said, her voice unsteady but brave. Julian studied her. You know about me. Yes. Now tell me who you are, and how did my nephew come to be with you? She took a deep breath. The baby made a small sound. Immediately, she became gentle. She rocked slowly, comforting the baby, kissing his head. My name is Willow, she said as the baby calmed down. Willow Hayes. Willow, Julian said. Tell me how you found Henry, Willow, and please be honest with me. Willow held the baby closer. I work nights at the hospital at Mass General. Julian felt concern. Mass General was near where the incident happened. I was working that night, Willow continued. They brought in a woman with beautiful dark hair. She had serious injuries. Elena, Julian closed his eyes, feeling deep sadness. She was protecting him, Willow said gently. She had shielded him with her body. He had marks from her injuries, but he was not hurt. The hospital was very busy. Medical staff were working hard. I was asked to check on the baby while they helped the mother. Willow paused. She looked at Julian with courage. I was cleaning the baby's face, Willow said. Then someone came in quickly. It was Detective Grant from Boston PD. Julian knew that name. Grant was supposed to be working with them, but had disappeared before the incident. Grant didn't seem like he was there to help, Willow said quietly. He had his gun drawn. He grabbed me by my scrubs. He asked where the Marsh baby was, but he didn't ask it like he wanted to protect him. He had this look in his eyes, cold, dead. He told me to hand the kid over so he could finish the cleanup. Julian's fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. I'm heavy, Mr. Marsh, Willow said suddenly, her tone completely matter-of-fact. The blunt statement caught Julian completely off guard. What? I'm heavy, Willow repeated, gesturing to her own frame. People don't look at me. Men like Grant, they look right through me like I'm a piece of furniture. I'm invisible. He didn't see me as a threat. He thought I was just some dumb, terrified, overweight nurse. A bitter, triumphant smile touched her lips. So I pretended to faint. Julian stared at her, mesmerized. I collapsed, Willow said. I dropped all 250 pounds of myself right onto the medical cart between us. It crashed, knocked over the four poles, shattered a tray of glass vials. Grant jumped back to avoid the glass, and while he was distracted, I scooped the baby up, threw my winter coat over both of us, and ran out the laundry exit. I knew if I gave him to the cops, he was dead. I knew if I stayed, we were both dead. Julian sat back on his heels, trying to process the magnitude of what this woman had done. She had risked her life, abandoned her career, and gone on the run all to save a baby she didn't even know. Where have you been for 3 months? Julian asked softly. Motels, Willow admitted, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Living out of my car for the first few weeks. Then I found that place in Dorchester. I paid someone cash to rent it under his name. I only went out at night. I wore baggy clothes, kept him tucked inside my coat against my chest. No one ever looks twice at a heavy woman walking alone in the dark. Julian felt a strange, tight pulling sensation in his chest. He looked at her bruised face, her exhausted eyes, the sheer, undeniable reality of her presence. For his entire adult life, he had been surrounded by people who used each other, who betrayed each other for money or power. And here was Willow Hayes, a woman the world deemed invisible, who possessed more honor and bravery than the entire Boston underworld combined. You saved him, Julian said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. You saved my blood. Willow's expression didn't soften. In fact, it grew harder. I didn't do it for you, Marsh. I did it for Elena. Julian blinked. Elena died on the table. She died, Willow corrected. But she woke up for 1 minute before she flatlined. When I was running down the hall with Henry under my coat, they were wheeling her to surgery. Our gurneys crossed. She saw me holding the lump under my coat. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was like iron. Willow leaned forward, the baby still safely trapped against her chest. And Julian, she made me swear to keep him away from the police. And she made me swear to keep him away from you. Julian felt as though he had been shot. Me? She thought I would hurt my own nephew? No, Willow said, shaking her head, her dark curls bouncing. She told me not to bring him to you because you were blind. She told me to hide the baby until I could find a way out of the city. Because she knew who ordered the hit. She knew who paid Grant. Theo took a threatening step forward from the door. Watch your mouth, nurse. Julian held up a hand, silencing his enforcer without looking at him. He stared intensely at Willow. Who, Willow? Who ordered the hit on my brother? Willow swallowed hard. She looked at Julian's terrifying, scarred face, realizing that the information she held was the spark that would burn Boston to the ground. It wasn't the Irish, Willow whispered. Elena told me exactly who set them up at the restaurant. She heard Michael screaming it before the bullets started flying. Julian leaned closer, his heart pounding in his ears. Tell me. Willow clutched the baby tighter to her chest, her dark eyes locking onto the Mafia boss. It was your Uncle Edmund, she said. Your own blood betrayed you. The name hung in the damp, cold air of the cellar like thick smoke. Edmund. Julian stared at the woman on the cot. Uncle Edmund was the Marsh family patriarch, the man who had dried Julian's tears when his father died, the advisor who had spent the last 3 months feeding Julian intel that the Irish syndicate had orchestrated the hit. Edmund had been directing Julian's violent rampage, using his grief as a weapon to wipe out rival factions while keeping Julian blind to the traitor operating inside his own house. A terrifying, unnatural calm washed over Julian. It was the calm of a predator that had finally spotted its true prey. Slowly, Julian stood up. He brushed the dust from the knees of his ruined suit and turned to his enforcer. Theo, pull every man loyal exclusively to my father's old guard. Lock down the estate, cut the landlines, and jam the cell signals. No one makes a call, not even the kitchen staff. Theo's face was pale, but he nodded firmly. And Edmund? Edmund thinks I'm chasing ghosts, Julian said, his voice devoid of all warmth. Let him keep thinking that until I put a bullet between his eyes. But first, we move them. He gestured toward Willow and the sleeping infant. Willow's grip on the baby tightened immediately. She pulled her legs closer to her chest, her body trembling slightly beneath her oversized sweater. Move us where? You aren't taking him from me. Julian looked down at her. He saw the sheer terror in her dark eyes. But beneath it, the unyielding steel of a woman who had already accepted death over surrender. He didn't see an invisible, overlooked nurse. He saw a fortress. He saw a lioness who had wrapped her own flesh and blood around his family's future. I'm not taking him from you, Willow, Julian said softly, extending a hand to her. If Elena trusted you, I trust you. But this cellar isn't safe, and my own home is crawling with rats. I have a private residence in Beacon Hill. It's off the books. No one knows about it except Theo. You're coming with me, and you're going to sleep in a real bed. Willow hesitated, her eyes darting from Julian's scarred face to Theo's imposing figure. She had spent 90 days hiding in the squalor of a Dorchester slum, relying entirely on her own wits and the fact that the world ignored heavyset women. Trusting the most dangerous man in Boston went against every survival instinct she had developed. But as Henry shifted against her chest, letting out a soft, hungry whimper, she knew she couldn't keep running. The baby needed proper care. "If you try to take him out of my arms, I'll fight you," Willow warned, her voice trembling but fierce. "I may be heavy, but I know how to throw my weight around." The corner of Julian's mouth twitched upward in a rare, genuine shadow of a smile. "I'm counting on it." Within the hour, Julian's armored SUV slipped out of the estate through a concealed service road, navigating the rain-slicked streets of Boston under cover of night. They arrived at a sleek, modern high-rise in Beacon Hill. The penthouse was a fortress of bulletproof glass and steel, completely isolated from the chaos of the Marsh syndicate. Once inside, the sheer exhaustion of the last 3 months seemed to hit Willow all at once. Julian directed her to the master suite, a massive room with a sprawling, comfortable king-sized bed. He provided her with clean, oversized sweatpants and a soft cotton t-shirt clothes he kept for himself, but insisted she use. Julian stood in the doorway, watching as Willow carefully laid Henry in the center of the massive mattress. She didn't put the baby down and walk away. Instead, she climbed into the bed, curling protectively around the infant, creating a warm barrier of comfort and safety. The sight of her made Julian realize how much strength she had shown throughout everything they had endured. She had used her courage and determination to protect his nephew from danger, cold, and those who wanted to harm him. Julian felt a powerful sense of respect and gratitude toward her. He wanted to make sure that, for once, someone was protecting Willow too. "Rest, Willow," Julian murmured, leaning against the doorframe. "I swear, on my life, no one comes through that door." Willow looked up at him, her dark curls framing her bruised, exhausted face. For the first time, the defiance in her eyes softened. "Thank you, Julian." Julian closed the door, leaving her in the dark. He walked out to the living room, where Theo was already preparing defensive equipment on the glass dining table. "We have a problem, boss," Theo said grimly. "I just got a ping from the estate's perimeter sensors. Edmund wasn't waiting for an update. He had men tailing my crew. They know we didn't find a normal hostage, and they know Grant went missing 3 months ago, after chasing a nurse from Mass General." Julian's expression hardened, the calmness disappearing instantly, replaced by the ruthless determination that had made him feared throughout Boston's underworld. "He knows she has the boy. He's making his move tonight," Theo confirmed. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they breach the building." "Let them come," Julian growled, preparing his weapon. "Tonight, the Marsh family gets purged." The assault began, not with a battering ram, but with the silent hiss of gunfire, taking out the security cameras in the private elevator lobby. Julian was already moving. He kicked open the door to the master's suite just as heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Willow was sitting up in bed, clutching Henry tightly to her chest, her eyes wide with renewed fear. "Panic room. Now," Julian ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. He pointed to the concealed steel door hidden behind a massive bookshelf. Willow didn't ask questions. She quickly climbed out of bed and moved toward the reinforced doorway, her protective instincts overriding her fear. As she hurried toward the panic room, the penthouse's main double doors burst inward in a shower of splintered wood and shattered hinges. 4 heavily armed men in tactical gear entered the living room. Theo immediately responded, stopping the first 2 before they could advance. Julian stepped out from the hallway, his face filled with fury, and stopped the 3rd attacker. But the 4th man, a large, scarred enforcer Julian recognized as Edmund's personal bodyguard, rushed past the line of fire and headed directly toward the master bedroom. He had seen Willow running and knew she was protecting the child. "Willow!" Julian roared, abandoning his position and sprinting after the man. Willow had just crossed the threshold of the panic room. She turned to pull the heavy steel door shut, but the bodyguard slammed his shoulder into it, preventing it from closing. The man forced his arm through the gap, threatening Willow. She had nowhere to run and no way to defend herself, but she had something else. With a determined cry, Willow didn't back away. She lunged forward and threw her entire weight against the edge of the heavy steel door. The sheer momentum and mass of her body acting as a battering ram, caught the bodyguard completely off guard. The steel door violently crushed the man's extended arm against the reinforced frame. The bone snapped with a sickening crunch. The bodyguard shrieked in agony, dropping the gun as his arm was mangled. Using the last ounce of her adrenaline, Willow shoved her hip against the door, completely trapping the man's limb until he collapsed backward into the bedroom. The heavy steel door slammed shut, the locking mechanism engaging with a heavy, definitive clank. On the other side, Julian tackled the screaming bodyguard to the floor, driving his knee into the man's throat until the struggling ceased. Silence descended upon the bloody penthouse. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and copper. Julian stood up, his chest heaving, his suit ruined with blood. Theo walked in from the living room, limping slightly, but alive. "Clear!" Theo grunted. Julian didn't answer. He walked over to the panic room and punched the security code into the keypad. The heavy door hissed open. Willow was sitting on the floor of the small reinforced room. She was shaking violently, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. But Henry was perfectly safe, swaddled tightly against her chest, staring up at her with wide, innocent eyes. Julian dropped to his knees in front of her. The ruthless mob boss, a man who had just slaughtered 4 men without blinking, reached out with trembling hands. He didn't take the baby. He wrapped his arms entirely around Willow's waist, pulling both her and the child into his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her exhaustion and the cheap soap she had used for months. "You're safe," Julian whispered into her skin, his voice cracking. "You're safe. I've got you." Willow let out a choked sob, finally letting her head rest against Julian's shoulder. Her arms relaxed just enough to let Julian place his hand against the baby's back. They sat there in the wreckage, a terrifying king, a stolen prince, and the magnificent, ordinary woman who had saved them both. The purge of the Marsh family happened before sunrise. With the bodyguard's phone, Julian tracked Uncle Edmund to a private hangar at Logan Airport. Edmund was attempting to flee the city. Julian didn't send his men. He went himself. The confrontation was brief, brutal, and finalized with a single gunshot that echoed across the tarmac. The betrayal was answered in blood. A week later, the Marsh compound was quiet. The war was over. Julian had cemented his rule, untouchable and absolute. In the sunlit gardens behind the estate, Julian walked out onto the stone patio. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his intricate tattoos. He stopped, leaning against the marble balustrade, simply watching. Sitting on a thick woven blanket on the grass was Willow. She was wearing a beautiful flowing emerald dress that hugged her wide hips and accentuated the deep, generous curves of her body. Her dark curls were shining in the sun, her bruises finally fading. She was laughing, a rich, full sound, as she bounced Henry on her thighs. She looked like a queen. Julian walked down the steps and sat on the blanket beside her. He reached out, resting his large, scarred hand firmly on her thigh. Willow smiled, leaning her body comfortably against his side. She was no longer the invisible night nurse. She was the woman who had brought the king to his knees, and the only woman Julian Marsh would ever love.